I just think it's so dumb for us to sit here and say, well, I guess they were just really creative on how they organize themselves, so we just can't do anything. We can't do it. I guess we just got to put up. Like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
If it's a terrorist-based ideology, then people that are, especially the self-proclaimed ones that are waving the flag, they're labeling themselves as terrorists, in my opinion. You know?
Yeah, and the problem, where that gets really tricky is, or dangerous, I should say, is that it's who they label the far right.
No one's talking about blocking somebody's freedom of speech. We're talking about an organized chapters here in the United States that are committing violence. You ever hear the tragedy of the organization known as Antifa? I thought not. It's not a story liberal media would tell you. It's a conservative talking point, an anti-fascist group. Ironic. In trying to destroy fascism, they became fascists themselves. In case you don't know what I'm referencing, go watch Star Wars Episode 3.
Oh, geez.
You guys got the reference.
Black brothers.
All right, everybody's least favorite window breakers are in the news this week. This time, actually, for a good thing. So Trump made two major announcements, both in this post here on Truth Social. The first part is he says that he's going to be designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. And the second part is that he is going to be recommending they investigate everybody that funds Antifa. And that could probably also include other left-wing protest riot organizations that end up causing violence in cities. So we'll get into both of that. But first up, question, is Antifa really a terrorist organization? I don't know, but I pulled up an image of both ISIS and Antifa next to each other to see if y'all can spot the differences. Just so you know, ISIS is the one on the bottom.
Just to clarify.
I think the only thing that threw me off was the language on the flag there.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. This is a fun little website, antifawatch.net. They have organized a collection of all the Antifa chapters here in the United States. See, we've got quite a few of these guys, and I was really surprised to see that there's one in Wyoming, of all places. I just couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. Wow. Wyoming, how you have fallen. I didn't know anybody lived in Wyoming, let alone Antifa.
It's just one dude in his mom's basement. You know that. He just made chapter in Wyoming.
All right. So for the last 10 years here in the United States, basically anytime that there's been mass violent rioting or destruction of property, general chaos, you very well might see the Antifa flags flying in the mix. So that's kind of what we know them as today. That's what they're known for. Just don't ask them to define what fascism is. Of course, Antifa stands for anti-fascist, because they probably won't be able to define it. In practice, to them, fascism actually means capitalism. I'm going to get into this later in the history lesson, but that is what has been shown even in their own literature and their websites to this day. Their working definition of fascism is basically capitalism. It also can mean literal democracy or constitutional republics, and even left-leaning centrists. Basically, if you're right of Stalin, you're a fascist. And a real strategy that they have in their own literature is to label everyone they don't like as a Nazi so they can justify punching them in the face. That is an actual strategy in their own literature. I'm not making that up. So only super prominent in the States since the 2016, right? So since 2016, they've been in the news. We know about them. I'm going to get into the history later in this episode because these guys have actually been around since the 1920s, and they have a fascinating and I would say very enlightening history. But before I get into their history, we're talking about them being labeled as a terrorist organization today. So what do you guys think about this? I know there's a lot of facets to this, but your general gist right off the bat, what is the significance of them being labeled as a terrorist organization, and what can we expect to see moving forward?
So my initial thoughts are just, it's a little bit late to be designating them as that. This should have been done the moment that they did something that was terror oriented. And so if you just look at the U.S. Code definition of terrorism, the general definition is just it's premeditated, politically motivated violence perpetuated against non-combatant targets by subnational groups or clandestine agents. And then at a minimum, it would be domestic terrorism, which is U.S. Code, it's 18 U.S. Code 23315. And it says it involves acts of dangerous to human lives and violate criminal law. So yeah, pretty easy they should be definitely a terrorist organization. It could be even foreign terrorist organizations. And so that opens up a lot of things that could happen if they are designated as a terrorist organization that our government could do to shut it down immediately and also go after actors funding them. So yeah, that needs to happen like yesterday. It needs to be happening now. And the Secretary of State, I think, is the one that can just finally designate them as that.
Yeah, one of the things I read in defense against Antifa, and they were condemning Trump's labeling them as a terrorist organization. One of the things they said, well, Trump has labeled these other organizations as terror organizations overseas, and that makes sense because they're into violence and stuff. And they're like, but Antifa, these are American citizens, and he didn't take into account that they have the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, so they should have, but the problem is that person is not talking about the violence, and the shows of violence. It's like, yes, they have freedom of speech, but that's not what they're doing.
Conveniently ignoring that part.
Yeah, they're not.
Yeah,
and
he's talking about the speech they give standing in front of the fire that they just caused in the car that they just flipped over. Like, protect that speech. Like, you got to be kidding me.
I'll just pull one example. July 2019, Willem von Spronsen. He's a self-proclaimed Antifa supporter. Thank you. He's a member of the Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club, which is an Antifa organization, I think in Oregon, Portland area, if I'm not wrong. He literally went and attacked a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement detention facility in Washington with an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and attempted to ignite a 500-gallon propane tank.
All right. So he employed his first and second.
I would say that was not an employment of Second Amendment rights.
If that had happened from the right, imagine the fallout of that, And most people don't even know that this has happened, right?
I did not know that even occurred. You said
because the liberal media is not going to report on it.
That is
exactly
insane. I've never heard of that before.
The media didn't cover it because it's not what they want to talk about, right?
Yeah, it doesn't fit the narrative.
And yet that's the thing is like that is, he got branded. He got shot, he died in his attempt to kill a bunch of people. And he got branded a martyr online by Antifa supporters.
Wow.
For violence, he was not a victim. He was he was trying to kill people, crazy.
I just saw Josh Hawley. He's a Republican senator from Missouri, and he was on Fox News just a day or two ago talking about how the Democratic Party is basically a theater troupe funded by George Soros. And he literally went into the fact that we have fake riots on campuses, in the streets, burning in LA, the Tesla dealerships, all that kind of stuff. And there's dark money that's supporting it. Like, you don't have pallets of professional grade gas masks showing up and not think there's some serious funding and coordination behind that. And so if they're able to designate them as this, that would then open it to where they can look into financial support, and actually anybody who funds it would be treated as a material support for terrorism. And so then they could then go after them as well for funding it. And so there's other asset tracking and seizures that can happen. There's other terrorism sentencing enhancements, if that's the case. And then they have other powers to just investigate the frameworks and just get deeper into it, surveil things and that sort of stuff. And so part of me wonders if there's people in our government that want this to happen so they can still have something to put in their campaign video and raise money on that we need to stand against.
It's insane how much all of this connects to George Soros. And also this whole topic is really interesting because talking about this connected some serious dots for me related to a conversation that we were having on our little Slack feed yesterday. And if we want to step into my conspiracy corner, I can finally connect some of those dots for you guys, if that's okay.
Do it.
Okay, so just a month ago, Trump called for George Soros and Son to face federal charges, right? We know instinctively that Soros is connected to Antifa. Like, we can't prove it yet, but somebody can prove it. Somewhere they can follow the breadcrumbs back and they can find that Trump or that Soros is directly funding Antifa or indirectly funding Antifa, who has now been called a terrorist organization. Well, terrorist organizations fall under the purview of FBI investigations, right? The FBI uses certain prison systems to hold people while they're awaiting trial. just so happens that one of those that's really, really close to where George Soros lives, less than an hour away in Westchester County, this prison system is in the city of Valhalla, which is the name that Kash Patel just dropped the other day, randomly talking about Charlie Kirk in a way that made zero sense, because Kash Patel is a Hindu and Charlie Kirk is a Christian. Why would he say Valhalla? I am wondering if he was signaling. He wasn't really talking about that at all. I'm wondering if he was signaling this whole thing, because it's all connected. And this prison, there's a county jail, which is an unusual thing because normally this would be held with federal prisons. But this particular county jail in Valhalla does house inmates who are waiting trial specifically for RICO trials.
Wow.
We'll see if anything ever comes of that, but I just
That would be more appropriate than the other alternative meaning.
So I wonder if maybe a lot of this is like operations from the FBI and those connected, coordinating to actually get the real bad guys who are behind a lot of this stuff, which is people like George Soros. I personally believe that they do talk through code via public announcements. The way that this little theory will be proven right or wrong will be if we ever get to know if George Soros is arrested and put into holding somewhere, because if he's put into holding in this county jail system in Valhalla City in New York, then
I do think it's interesting what you guys have brought up so far. A couple of points on what y'all brought up to kind of drive those home. First off was, like you said, Troy, when I tried looking into this, any website or any news article that I found that was not explicitly right-wing and conservative was completely hiding or shying away or avoiding the fact that Antifa has committed lots of violence. And that's what it focused on, was just like, oh, well, there might be some First Amendment rights issues kind of with the situation. It's just like, wait, hold on a second. No one's talking about blocking somebody's freedom of speech. We're talking about an organized chapters here in the United States that are committing violence and coming out. And it's not just protesting, not just marching with flags, but then there's often, throwing bricks at police cars and, even the worst things, like you mentioned, with a gun and trying to catch a propane tank on fire. So this was actually kind of crazy to me. So this isn't the first time that Trump said he was going to do this. He actually tweeted in 2020 saying that he was going to try to label Antifa as a terrorist organization. And he received a lot of pushback from his own even administration. So his FBI director at the time, Christopher Wray, he said at the time in a congressional hearing that, quote, Antifa is not a group or an organization, but instead a movement or an ideology. Right. So that's what he referred to it as. And that's oftentimes what people will point to. I noticed that people will say that they're decentralized. And it kind of depends on who you ask. They're decentralized. They don't
except all the riots look the same everywhere you look. So yeah, that's you're right. And the same gear and the same tactics and the same everything. You're right. But there's no coordination. I'm sure it's not an organization.
Right. No coordination. They're disconnected, independent chapters. Right. There's no formal leadership organization. From the little bit I've seen, I've tried to look into it. I'd be curious to see the exact truth. Somebody do a full-blown investigation. Maybe somebody has, and I just don't know about it. I would say from the little bit I've looked into it, I feel like the truth is probably a little bit in the middle between them being so completely decentralized with no oversight to then being like, obviously there's not like an Antifa headquarters where the president of Antifa has an office or whatever. That doesn't
like, okay.
But
let me say this:
there are disconnected chapters, but of course, the investigation is how connected are these so-called disconnected chapters when, like you said, they're all kind of doing the same thing.
I guess it's disconnected in the same way that a major corporation has factories disconnected. They're all independent profit centers. They all run their own business, but they all use the playbook from the corporation, and they have somebody managing, and there is absolute coordination among all of it. And so, but yeah, if you walk into that facility, if they take all the branding off, you'd have no idea it could be the same company, but it's exactly the same.
In response to you mentioned Christopher Wray's his comment about Antifa being an ideology, not an organization. I've got two responses to that. The first one is Attorney General William Barr also made a remark at this around the same time about Antifa, and what he said was, after looking at the riots and the protests that took place, a lot of them obviously after in 2020 during the summer after George Floyd's murder, but he said there is clearly some high degree of organization involved at some of these events and coordinated tactics that we are seeing. So his response was very different to Christopher Wray's response.
For sure.
And here's the thing, even if Christopher Wray is right that it's more of an ideology and not an organization, if you look at the ideology, a study was done about Antifa. A deep research study was done by Mark Bray, and he found essentially that most Antifa supporters, although they don't necessarily want violence to be the first option, or they don't necessarily support that, they agree that violence is the option if the other things aren't working. Although they label themselves as like anti-fascists, the ideology behind the organization in the research that he did was that this is what it says in his study. He writes, Antifa is an illiberal politics of social revolutionism applied to fighting the far right, not only literal fascists. So essentially, if you put those two ideas together from their own ideology, the ideology itself is a terrorist ideology because it's saying we should be able to use violence to fight those we're against, and we're against neo-Nazis, fascism, and the far right. And whoever else they want to put in that category. So it's like, even with what Christopher Wray said, it's an ideology. Okay, but if it's a terrorist-based ideology, then people that are lining up, and especially the self-proclaimed ones that are waving the flags, it's like they're labeling themselves as terrorists, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the problem, where that gets really tricky is, or dangerous, I should say, is that it's who they label the far right, which means the definitions are pretty much wide open. It's whoever they consider to be a Nazi. It's not like that part is super organized and well laid out. It's just like, well, you disagree with me, therefore you're the far right and you're a Nazi.
I can tell you from my research, anybody that considers themselves to be a centrist, somewhat capitalist-minded individual is considered to be far right or fascist for them. One of the articles that was definitely more left-leaning that I read was pointing out the difference between the fact that Trump can't really label this a foreign terrorist organization. However, unless, of course, it turns out that there are funds coming from outside the United States. Not, I wouldn't know anything about that, but at the moment, these are all seem to be based here in the United States, and the United States is the hotbed for Antifa organizations. So there's that. So I thought that was kind of interesting because there's actually like domestic terror is kind of listed lower than foreign terrorism organizations. So for instance, the Department of Justice can prosecute anyone who provides material support to foreign terrorist organizations. But from a little bit of research I could tell, it just seemed like domestic terror is not listed quite as high. Not that it's not high. I did notice, I saw, I was like, well, what does it mean if they're going to actually label them as domestic terror group? One thing is that means that they would end up on the FBI, and Homeland Security has a priority list of domestic terror threat assessments that it tries to like focus on. And usually, and here's some of that list right now, usually that includes gangs, mafias, racial supremacy groups, and other hate groups. You can see various gangs and like white supremacy groups here, and like even mafia stuff going on. And then one thing that I thought that was interesting connected to this is Trump has suggested, actually, and has told Pam Bondi this, about bringing RICO cases against
RICO,
Antifa. Is it called? What's it called?
RICO cases.
RICO cases. Thank you. And that stands for Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations. And that was an act that a federal law that targets organized crime. And I thought this was interesting. It might be somewhat related. But during the 80s, the FBI did something similar to the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a gang that developed in like the 60s or whatever. And they went after them for like a decade with RICO laws, basically. RICO, so we could do a similar thing. RICO could do a similar thing where they bring charges against people funding Antifa or other left-wing movements that have rioted or destroyed property, basically getting into like, where is this money coming from? Why is it causing this violence? And it'd be kind of something similar that we've done with like gangs here in the United States before. So I just wanted to throw those out there.
I think that's a good clarification. I mean, I just think it's so dumb for us to sit here and say, well, I guess they were just really creative on how they organize themselves, so we just can't do anything. We can't do. I guess we're just got to put up. Like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like, absolutely, whether it's RICO or terrorist organization or whatever, they arrest 5 guys and they do a deep investigation in them. It will probably take about 3 minutes to find out. Look at their bank accounts. Look at what they're like. I mean, just under an investigation of terror, Like if this guy through a glass window, okay, yeah, no, you shouldn't be looking at everybody's bank accounts, but there are things that people do that they forfeit rights if they do those things, and they have to be in jail or they have to have consequences. So absolutely, there's no excuse. Whatever they need to do, and they need to do it ASAP. Like, enough talking about it. Like, do this. Like, why is this not already done? You know, this has been happening for years, and so it's obviously maybe RICO is the better way to go, because and then maybe they dig into it and they find out, well, there is foreign connections, and so then it becomes a foreign terrorist organization as well. So, and that's where I wanted to talk about the dark money and that kind of stuff, which we can make sure we cover that before we leave.
Yeah, go ahead and talk about dark money, Ryan, because I think that this is connected a lot of like, this is what we're circling around here is like, you know, the end of the day, it's like, how do these organizations have the money, like you said, to show up to riots with, you know, this uniform, basically the same kind of uniform all over the country, and those gas masks are not cheap. So I think the dark money thing will be interesting, and then maybe I can get into the history.
Yeah. So, okay. So when you hear the term dark money, it's just kind of a general term that is where the money comes from. We don't know. So I'll just give you a quick example. Here's the campaign. They got a report. Here's the political action committee that gave the campaign. They got a report. Also, who gave money to them. Here's the 501c4s. They don't have to report where they got the money from, but it looks like they got them off. They got it from George Soros. So he can fund all these organizations. They don't have to report where they got money from. So you can see this, but it's illegal for a political action committee to coordinate with a campaign. They can send out flyers, they can give money to campaign, but they can't coordinate. And so, like in other words, hey, we're going to send flyers to this neighborhood, you send flyers to that neighborhood. That's illegal. But anyway, you see here how it really means nothing. All you do is add another organization in between, get a 501c4, and that takes care of it. And you also can't do what's called earmarking, which is where technically Soros can't say, here, I'm giving this money to you, you give it to them, and then you give it to them. Like, you can't technically do that. They're supposed to do it, but good luck proving that, you know. I mean, if that organization
by
was
word of mouth, you know, behind the scenes.
So like when I ran for office, I had every donation under over $25, I had to give the name and the address of who gave me that money. And otherwise that was a problem for me. If a super PAC gives money to a political campaign, then they have to say where they got their money from. So they also have to report that. But if it's a 501c4, they can, which is just like a general welfare designation, that what they're doing, they can give money to political activity, and including endorsing candidates and do all that and lobbying and everything, but they don't have to disclose who their donors are. So what does someone do like George Soros? He sets up hundreds of 501c4 and then funnels a bunch of money into those, and then the 501c4 gives the money to whoever they want to give the money to, and then they don't have to report where the donors are coming from. Now, Antifa's not a 501c3, 501c4, it doesn't matter, but they are getting money somewhere from someone, and significant amounts of money. And so the point is that they need to be designated as such so that they can then look into where that money's coming from. And so that's, you could even get into like George Soros funding of DAs and district attorneys. And that's why we have things happening like in LA. If you look at, you can see the funding of the district attorney over there and why they're not prosecuting these kinds of things, and why they say, oh, anything under $1,000 is petty theft. Well, look at who funded their campaign and where that money came from. And it's connected, 501c4 organizations connected back up to these.
We should just
elites.
change the name of LA to Gotham already. You know, like, come on. This,
I think, is absolutely fascinating. And you're going to notice a lot of themes from that we've already talked about, and some of the issues with Antifa. And yeah, you're going to notice a lot of things here, but I'm going to get into the history, a little quick history dive. I think it's absolutely fascinating. You can see the very first, we're Antifa, we're going to punch Nazis, their little flag there, with them punching a Nazi there. I just thought that was kind of cute. The communist origins of the Antifa extremist group. So this is the history. And again, you're going to see lots of themes. It's going to be very enlightening. So in 1921, there was a group founded in Germany, and it was came from the Soviet Union. It was supported by the Soviet Union. This was the Soviet Union's idea, was they were going to basically get communists in other countries to try to, there was a Soviet Union Russia had their communist revolution in 1917. And they were like, all right, time to have that revolution in other countries. So the first country on their docket was Germany. The reason it was Germany was because Germany had the second largest communist party, just only second to the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union said, all right, we are going to organize an organization in Germany to start a communist revolution. And that organization became known as Antifa. So these parts might sound similar to you guys. So the original Antifa, which is based in Germany, they labeled all political parties in Germany, besides the Communist political party, they labeled every single party as fascist. They're just all blanket statement fascist. So the anti-fascist term was a way to simplify organizing around a common enemy, which was anybody who's not communist, right? So that's the first characteristic. Their second characteristic was their true enemy was not actual literal fascism, but was capitalism. That was their true enemy from the very start, very plain, very open, very clear, except for they were convoluting it with the term fascism. Because this is kind of crazy. Fascists actually did exist in Germany at the time. The same time, 1921, an evil mustache man made the National Socialist German Working Party. Same year, 1921. We all know about the National Socialist Party. I've already said their name a couple times. Hopefully we don't get censored for that. However, as much as the Antifa members today might be proud that their organization once actually resisted the literal Nazi party in Germany, what's crazy is that was not their main target. Their main target was the Social Democratic Party in Germany. They thought that they were the biggest enemy, and Nazis were kind of lower on their list of parties that they were concerned with. So from the beginning, it was clear that the real enemy was not actual fascism, but just basically normal capitalism.
So it's anti-cap is what it should have been called.
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's hard to be enemies with somebody that you ideologically align with.
Well, I'm going to get into that. So here we go. And their goal, of course, was to start a communist revolution in Germany.
Welcome to the leftist playbook.
Number 3 characteristic about them. So they were violent and destructive from the start. This is the playbook that they use, the same playbook that they use now. Literally the same literature, same strategies, and the same symbolisms they use today here in America, the Antifa groups do. So they were violent and destructive from the start. They targeted anybody who wasn't a communist. And of course, they were trying to start a violent revolution. So here's a little important lessons that we can pull from this German Antifa group. So the first lesson was there was very little distinction between the anti-fascists and the actual fascists that were in Germany. Why was that the case? Well, it's because the fascist party was founded by Mussolini. And whether you were a anti-fascist, which was just a communist, or if you were an actual fascist, it just determined your politics were very similar. It only determined if you like Stalin more or if you like Mussolini more. So Mussolini was a Marxist and a socialist, and he was expelled from the Italian Socialist Party in 1914 because he supported Italy's involvement in World War I. And so he ended up developing his own political ideology and party after getting kicked out of the Socialist Party, which would end up being basically a cousin to communism. So his quoted slogan all the time is, quote, all within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. So very similar to communism, and that's fascism. The German National Socialist Party followed in Mussolini's footsteps, right? And so that's why the anti-fascists were opposed to them, because the Antifa group was on the side of the Soviet Union. They were trying to start a communist revolution, where the Nazis were trying to start a fascist revolution. So they were opposed to them, not really so much in ideology, but basically just opposed in leadership. So this is a quote from this article here, talking about the similarities. Both the communist and fascist systems were based in collectivism and state-planned economies. Both also proposed systems wherein the individual was heavily controlled by a powerful state, and both were responsible for large-scale atrocities and genocide. And that's end quote. Of course, in the end, we know that the Soviet-styled communism actually killed far more people than even the Nazis did, and that's saying something. Final lesson. The German Antifa organization actually pushed the country towards the Nazis. I just could not get over this. I thought this was crazy. So their violence ended up having an opposite effect. People hated the fact that they were a violent group in Germany, and they ended up hating what they stood for because they were okay with committing violence against people that were their enemies, which was everyone who wasn't communist. And so basically the German middle class, who was already concerned with the communists because they had seen what the communists did to the Russian middle class, which was take their stuff or maybe kill them or both. They were already a little bit concerned with the communists. And then after the Antifa tried to get a violent insurrection going in Germany, it helped persuade a lot of the middle class to start gravitating towards the Nazis. So the lesson was that Antifa's violent communist ideology is not even good at its stated goal, which was
it didn't even persuade people against Nazism.
No, it did not. It actually pushed.
That's crazy. That's insane.
Absolutely insane.
which makes sense. That makes sense. It's if you're under threat of somebody being violent, and that was my first thought that I had when I saw the news about Trump labeling them a terrorist organization. My first thought was, oh my gosh, I hope we don't have violent riots or something. And then I realized, like, oh my gosh, that is the fear tactic that they're implementing through every time we don't get what we want, we run out and we burn things and we destroy things. And I was like, man, that's crazy. Like that is what they're trying to do, is to control the populace and the masses through fear. Like if we don't get what we want, we're going to throw
a terror organization.
Like a terror organization.
Literally the definition.
Yeah. Can I read this? I'm going to read this because
absolutely. I'm done. I was just going to say, the last thing I was going to say was that the German Antifa party or group officially disbanded in 2004. So they were around for a very long time, although, they don't really do much after that initial bit that I got into. But of course, just reiterating that current groups of Antifa today in the United States, most of them started in like the 1980s. That's when they began starting here, and they came out of really radical and extremist left-wing groups. And they do use the same symbolism and tactics and playbooks that the original German anti-fascists did. And so that's kind of their history. So go for it.
This is a self-proclaimed Antifa activist from Baltimore. And this is what they said when they were interviewed. They were explaining the use of violence, because they were asking them, well, why are you all so violent? Or like, why are, like, what's with the violence? And they said, you fight them by writing letters and making phone calls so that you don't have to fight them with fists. You fight them with fists so you don't have to fight them with knives. You fight them with knives so you don't have to fight them with guns. You fight them with guns so you don't have to fight them with tanks. Terrorist organization. Like, it's like, we
what
are
in the world.
How else can you say I'm a terrorist organization without saying it? Like, it's insane.